The battlefield of betrayal. The sky above was painted in hues of ash and crimson, the remnants of a battle that had raged for days. Smoke curled from the twisted remains of alien warships and human tanks, the once thriving planet now reduced to a wasteland of broken dreams and shattered alliances. Karen, a Xerthan warrior, lay on the cold, unforgiving ground, his body half buried under the wreckage of his own mech suit. Karen's 4 arms, once a symbol of his race's strength and dominance, now hung limp, their organic and mechanical parts damaged beyond repair. The faint hum of his life support module was a cruel reminder of his tenuous grip on life. His breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale carrying the bitter taste of betrayal. The Xerthans had been proud conquerors, their empire spanning galaxies. Karen had been a decorated commander, leading his people in battles that crushed resistance with precision and ruthlessness. But this war had been different. Humanity had resisted with a ferocity that even the Xerthans hadn't anticipated. It was a war of survival for the humans, and they fought with a desperation that both confounded and impressed Karen. He had always respected warriors, even those of lesser species, but respect hadn't spared him from his fate. When his unit had faced overwhelming human resistance, Karen had given the order to retreat. His tactical decision, meant to save lives, was seen as a disgrace by his superiors. The Xerthan code demanded victory at all costs, and failure was synonymous with weakness. When Karen's ship was struck by a stray missile during the retreat, his comrades didn't return for him. He had watched, helpless, as their vessels ascended into the blood-red sky, abandoning him on the battlefield. A Xerthan warrior who couldn't fight was deemed worthless. His people's cold pragmatism now seemed like a curse, their loyalty as fleeting as the stars that blinked in the distance. Pain coursed through his body as Karen tried to move. The lower half of his exoskeleton was fused to the earth, and his organic limbs refused to respond. His compound eyes scanned the horizon, searching for signs of life, friend or foe. But there was nothing. Only silence, punctuated by the occasional groan of collapsing structures. As the hours dragged on, Karen's mind wandered to his family on Xertha Prime. His mate, Salvin, had always questioned the morality of their empire's endless conquests. She had pleaded with him to seek a different path, one that didn't involve the destruction of other civilizations. But Karen had dismissed her concerns, believing in the righteousness of their cause. Now, lying amidst the ruins, he wondered if she had been right all along. The sound of footsteps jolted him from his thoughts. His heart raced as he strained to identify the source. Was it a human scavenger, looking to loot alien technology? Or perhaps one of his own, finally returning to rescue him? He activated his damaged visor, its cracked screen flickering as it tried to analyze the figure approaching. It was a human, clad in the standard-issue armor of Earth's military forces. The soldier moved cautiously, weapon drawn, scanning the area for threats. Karen's breathing quickened. He was defenseless, an easy target for a species that had every reason to hate him. The humans stopped a few feet away, lowering their weapons slightly as they observed the fallen Xerthan. Karen met their gaze, his compound eyes reflecting both fear and resignation. If this was to be his end, so be it. He had no strength left to fight, no will to beg. To his surprise, the soldier didn't fire. Instead, they crouched down, their face shield retracting to reveal a young man with sharp features and weary eyes. The soldier's expression was unreadable, but there was no hatred in his gaze, only curiosity and something Karen couldn't quite identify. "You're alive," the human said, his voice tinged with disbelief. He reached for something on his belt, and Karen braced himself for the final blow. Instead, the soldier produced a small medical scanner, its soft hum breaking the oppressive silence. "Why?" Karen croaked, his voice barely audible. His throat burned from the effort, the alien syllables coming out garbled. The soldier hesitated, his hand hovering over the scanner. "Because leaving you here like this, it's not right." Karen's eyes widened. Compassion. It was an alien concept among his kind, a weakness that had no place in the Earthen hierarchy. And yet, this human, a supposed inferior being, was showing him a kindness he had never known. The soldier began inspecting Karin's injuries, his movements careful and methodical. "I don't know if I can save you," he admitted, "but I'll try." Karin wanted to protest, to tell the human that it was pointless, that he was better off dead. But a spark of something unfamiliar flickered within him: hope. As the soldier worked to stabilize him, Karin realized that his life was no longer his own. This human, with his inexplicable kindness, had given him a second chance, and for the first time in his existence, Karin wondered if there was more to life than conquest and power. A fragile alliance. Karin's consciousness wavered as the human soldier worked quickly to stabilize his injuries. The battlefield seemed to blur around him, the dull ache in his body amplified by the deafening silence of abandonment. He didn't know why the human was helping him. Perhaps it was a strange sense of honor, or maybe it was a trap. Trusting the enemy was anathema to everything Karin had been taught, yet he had no other choice. The soldier introduced himself as Lieutenant Michael Reyes, a medic in Earth's resistance forces. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, sealing the worst of Karin's wounds with a portable medical device. Karin winced as the human applied pressure to his shattered exoskeleton, but he said nothing. Pain was a companion he knew well, though this situation felt far beyond the limits of his endurance. "You're lucky I found you," Michael said, his tone neutral, though his eyes betrayed a mix of concern and calculation. "Another squad will sweep through here soon. They won't hesitate to finish you off." Karin's mandibles clicked softly, a gesture of acknowledgement in his culture. "Why? Do you care?" he rasped, his voice weak but laced with curiosity. Michael glanced at him, pausing for a moment. "I've seen too much death," he admitted. "Doesn't matter whose side you're on. At some point, it just feels wrong to let someone suffer like this." Karin stared at him, perplexed. Compassion was alien to him, literally and figuratively. In Earthen society, the weak were culled, the injured left behind. It was a system that had bred strength and survival, but now, for the first time, Karin questioned its cost. "Your kind would not do this," Karin said, his voice barely audible. Michael snorted softly. "Yeah, well, humans are complicated. Sometimes we fight each other more than we fight aliens. But we've got our moments." Moments. Karin considered the word. For his species, life was a relentless march of conquest, every action a calculated move in the grand game of dominance. Moments of kindness, as Michael called them, had no place in the Earthen psyche. And yet, here he was, alive because of one. As Michael worked, the faint sound of approaching footsteps reached Karin's sensitive ears. His body tensed, and he clicked his mandibles in alarm. "Someone comes." Michael froze, tilting his head to listen. A group of soldiers, human by the sound of their boots, was making its way toward their position. Michael's jaw tightened. He glanced at Karin, then at the distant figures emerging from the smoky horizon. "Stay quiet," Michael whispered, his voice low and urgent. He pulled a thermal blanket from his pack and draped it over Karin's massive frame, hoping to obscure him from view. As the squad approached, Michael stood and waved, feigning nonchalance. "Lieutenant Reyes, medic, Alpha Company," he called out, his voice steady. The lead soldier, a grizzled man with a stern expression, lowered his weapon slightly. "Reyes, what are you doing out here alone? Thought your unit pulled back hours ago." Michael shrugged, his movements casual. "Got separated. Thought I saw a survivor, but it was just debris." The soldier nodded, though his gaze lingered on Michael with suspicion. "You shouldn't be out here. Command's orders are clear. No one stays behind. Especially not in enemy territory." Michael nodded. "Understood, sir. I'll fall in with you." Karin lay still under the blanket, his breaths shallow. The heat of the battlefield made it stifling, but he didn't dare move. He could hear the humans talking, their voices blending into a tense rhythm. For the first time in his life, he was utterly at the mercy of another being, a human, no less. It was both terrifying and humbling. The squad moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Michael waited a few moments before pulling back the blanket. His face was tense, his lips pressed into a thin line. "That was close," he muttered. Karen exhaled a low, clicking sigh. "You protected me." Michael met his gaze. "Yeah, well, don't get used to it. If they find out I'm helping you, I'm as good as dead." Karen didn't respond immediately. His gaze shifted to the horizon, where smoke billowed from the remains of human and earthen machinery. "Your loyalty to your kind. It is admirable." Michael laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Loyalty's a funny thing. Right now, I'm not even sure who my kind is." Karen tilted his head, his antennae twitching slightly. "You are conflicted." Michael sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Let's just say this war hasn't exactly brought out the best in anyone. Humanity's fighting for survival, but sometimes I wonder if we're losing our humanity in the process." The word struck a chord in Karen, though he couldn't explain why. He had always viewed humans as weak, emotional creatures, but this one was different. Michael's actions defied logic, yet they carried a strength Karen couldn't ignore. Michael knelt beside him, his tone softening. "I don't know why I'm doing this," he admitted, "but something tells me you're not like the others. Maybe we can help each other." Karen's mandibles twitched in what passed for a smile among his kind. Perhaps. For the first time since his betrayal, Karen felt a flicker of something he couldn't name, a fragile bond forming between himself and the human who had spared him. It was tenuous, built on little more than circumstance, but it was enough to give him hope. The price of compassion. Karen struggled to process the whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. The pain of his injuries, the bitterness of betrayal, and the bewildering kindness of this human soldier, it was all too much. Yet, despite his skepticism, a tiny spark of trust began to take root. Michael's actions were illogical, reckless even, but they held a sincerity Karen had never encountered in his own kind. As twilight descended over the ruined battlefield, Michael began preparing to move. "We can't stay here," he said, glancing at the horizon. "Patrols will sweep the area soon. And if they find you, it's over, for both of us." Karen nodded weakly, his voice still raspy from the damage to his body. "I cannot walk." Michael looked at him, then at the remains of the alien's exoskeleton fused to the ground. His brow furrowed as he considered the problem. "I'll figure something out. Just don't die on me." Karen managed a soft click of amusement. "You risk much for an enemy." Michael shrugged, pulling a compact welding tool from his pack. "You're not the enemy right now. You're just someone who needs help." The soldier began working on Karen's exoskeleton, cutting away the mangled parts that pinned him to the ground. Sparks flew in the dim light, illuminating Michael's determined expression. Karen watched him in silence, marveling at the strange contradiction of human nature, this mix of ferocity and compassion. As Michael worked, he spoke, filling the silence with his thoughts. "You know, when this war started, I hated your kind. All of us did. You destroyed our cities, killed millions. We called you monsters." He paused, glancing at Karen. "But seeing you like this, I don't know. Maybe we're not so different after all." Karen's antennae twitched. "You speak of understanding. Yet your kind fights as fiercely as mine. Perhaps we are the same." Michael sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Maybe. But if we are, then we've all lost something important." The sound of distant gunfire interrupted their conversation. Michael's head snapped up, his body tense. "They're getting closer," he muttered. "We've got to move now." Karen tried to lift himself as Michael freed the last of his trapped limbs, but his body refused to respond. "I cannot. Leave me." Michael crouched beside him, his face hardening. "That's not an option. I didn't risk my life to save you just to leave you behind." He scanned the area, his eyes landing on a broken transport sled a few meters away. "That'll have to do." With effort, Michael dragged the sled over to Karin. Using every ounce of his strength, he hoisted the alien's massive frame onto the makeshift transport. Sweat dripped down his face as he secured Karin with straps, muttering under his breath about the absurdity of the situation. Karin watched him, a mixture of gratitude and confusion flickering in his compound eyes. "Why do this? Your kind would call it madness." Michael gave a grim smile. "Yeah, probably. But I've seen enough madness to know the world doesn't need more of it. Maybe helping you is my way of proving to myself that there's still some good left in us." The words lingered in the air as Michael began pulling the sled across the battlefield. The ground was uneven, littered with debris and the remains of fallen soldiers from both sides. Each step was a struggle, but Michael pushed forward, his resolve unshaken. As they moved, Karin couldn't help but reflect on his own people's values. The Xerthans prided themselves on their strength, their efficiency, their ruthlessness. Compassion was a weakness, and cooperation with lesser species was unthinkable. Yet here was a human, an enemy, risking everything to save him. It challenged everything Karin believed, forcing him to confront the harsh realities of his own culture. After what felt like hours, they reached the remnants of an abandoned outpost, a crumbling structure half buried in the earth. Michael guided the sled inside, carefully maneuvering Karin into a sheltered corner. He collapsed beside the alien, breathing heavily, his face pale from exhaustion. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said between breaths. "I need to figure out our next move." Karin studied him, his mandibles clicking softly. "You exhaust yourself. For me. Why?" Michael leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes briefly. "Because I have to believe it's worth it. That saving one life, even yours, matters." The sincerity in his voice struck Karin deeply. For all his training, all his experience as a warrior, he had never encountered a belief like this. It was powerful, almost intoxicating. Perhaps there was more to these humans than he had ever understood. As the night deepened, the two unlikely allies sat in silence, the weight of the war pressing down on them. For Karin, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to reevaluate everything he had been taught. For Michael, it was a gamble, a desperate attempt to hold onto the humanity he feared was slipping away. In that fragile silence, a bond began to form, a bond that would be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. The enemy within. The outpost was a shell of its former self, broken walls, and shattered windows standing as a testament to the relentless war. The air inside was stale, filled with the metallic tang of old blood and burnt circuits. Michael crouched in the corner, tinkering with a damaged communication device he'd salvaged from the wreckage. Karin lay nearby, his body motionless, but his mind racing. For the first time since his betrayal, Karin felt an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. His survival now depended entirely on this human soldier, a member of the species he had once sworn to conquer. The thought unsettled him, but it also sparked a curiosity he couldn't ignore. Michael cursed under his breath as the comm device sputtered and died. "Of course it doesn't work," he muttered, tossing it aside. "Why would anything go right today?" Karin clicked his mandibles softly. "You seem troubled." Michael shot him a glance, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "You think I'm stuck in enemy territory with an alien twice my size who could crush me if he wanted to? Yeah, I'd say I'm a little troubled." Karin tilted his head, his antennae twitching. "If I wished to harm you, I would have done so. Before." Michael laughed, the sound dry and humorless. Comforting. The tension in the room was palpable, but beneath it lay a growing understanding. They were both soldiers, both survivors of a war that neither truly controlled. In that shared experience, they found a sliver of common ground. As the hours passed, Michael rummaged through his pack, distributing supplies. He handed Karen a small pouch of water, watching as the alien hesitated before accepting it. "You trust me enough to drink that?" Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. Karen's mandibles twitched in what passed for a smile. "Trust is earned, but I have no choice." Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Fair enough." The quiet moment was interrupted by the distant rumble of approaching vehicles. Michael froze, his body tensing as he listened. Karen's ears twitched, his acute hearing picking up the telltale sounds of heavy engines and troop movements. "They're searching for survivors," Michael whispered, his voice taut with urgency. He peeked through a crack in the wall, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the headlights of a patrol convoy in the distance. Karen's compound eyes glimmered in the dim light. "Your people, or mine?" Michael frowned, pulling back from the wall. "Human patrols. They won't ask questions if they find us here, especially if they see you." Karen regarded him carefully. "You could leave. Save yourself." Michael snorted, his expression hardening. "Not happening. I didn't drag your oversized butt halfway across the battlefield just to ditch you now." The word struck Karen in a way he hadn't anticipated. In his culture, loyalty was conditional, a commodity traded for power or survival. But Michael's loyalty seemed unwavering, even irrational. It was both baffling and admirable. The rumble grew louder, the vehicles drawing closer. Michael moved quickly, pulling Karen's sled deeper into the shadows. He grabbed his rifle, checking the ammunition before positioning himself near the entrance. "If they find us, stay quiet," Michael whispered. "Let me do the talking." Karen nodded, his body tense with anticipation. He felt helpless, a state he was unaccustomed to. His entire life had been spent in control of his troops, his enemies, his destiny. Now he was at the mercy of a human soldier who had every reason to abandon him. The patrol stopped just outside the outpost, the hum of engines cutting off abruptly. Voices carried through the night, sharp and commanding. Michael pressed himself against the wall, his finger hovering over the trigger of his rifle. "Search the area," one of the soldiers barked. "We're not leaving until every corner is clear." Michael cursed under his breath, his grip tightening on his weapon. Karen's mandibles clicked softly, a nervous gesture. "What will you do?" Michael didn't answer immediately. His jaw clenched as he weighed his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Whatever it takes." The first soldier entered the outpost, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Michael held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel Karen's gaze on him, the alien's silent presence a reminder of the high stakes. The soldier moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. Michael raised his rifle, aiming for the intruder's center mass. His finger hovered over the trigger, sweat dripping down his temple. But before he could act, Karen made a low guttural sound, a signal of surrender. Michael whipped his head toward the alien, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you doing?" he hissed. Karen's voice was calm, resolute. "If they find me, they will kill us both. Let me distract them." Michael shook his head, his voice rising in desperation. "No, that's suicide." Karen's gaze softened, a strange expression for a Xerthan warrior. "Your compassion has shown me a different path. Let me repay it." Before Michael could respond, Karen emitted a louder sound, drawing the soldier's attention. The man turned sharply, his flashlight sweeping the room. Michael had no choice. He fired, the shot echoing like a thunderclap in the confined space. The soldier crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. Michael sprang into action, dragging the body into the shadows as the rest of the patrol began shouting outside. Karen stared at him, his eyes wide with surprise. "You killed him." Michael's expression was grim. "I told you, I'm not leaving you behind." The patrol outside was on high alert now, their voices growing louder as they prepared to storm the outpost. Michael looked at Karen, his mind racing. "We need to move. Now." Karen nodded, his respect for the human soldier growing with each passing moment. Despite their differences, despite the odds, Michael had chosen to stand by him. It was a loyalty Karen had never known, a loyalty that might just save them both. Escape into shadows. The air in the outpost crackled with tension, the shouts of the patrol squad growing louder as the soldiers prepared to breach the building. Michael's pulse raced, his mind spinning as he calculated their slim chances of escape. Every instinct screamed to run, but with Karen unable to move on his own, flight seemed impossible. Karen, propped against the crumbling wall, watched Michael intently. "You should leave," he said, his voice low but firm. "They will kill you if they find me." Michael didn't even glance back as he secured his rifle and grabbed the sled straps. "And I'll kill myself later if I leave you here to die." Karen's mandibles clicked in frustration, but he said nothing. He had never encountered such stubbornness, especially from a species he had considered weak and impulsive. Michael's resolve was baffling and oddly inspiring. The sound of boots crunching gravel drew closer. Michael tightened his grip on the sled, muscles straining as he dragged Karen toward a back exit. Each step was a battle against exhaustion, but he refused to stop. He wouldn't let this be the end, not for either of them. The patrol squad entered the building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Fan out," one of the soldiers ordered. They couldn't have gone far. Michael and Karen reached the back exit, a partially collapsed doorway leading into the dense underbrush. Michael paused, wiping sweat from his brow as he assessed their options. The forest beyond was thick and dark, offering a chance to lose their pursuers, but it would be nearly impossible to navigate with the sled. "Your strength has limits," Karen said, his voice tinged with concern. "You cannot carry me forever." Michael glanced at him, his jaw set in determination. "Watch me." Before Karen could respond, Michael pulled the sled into the brush, using the dense foliage to conceal their movements. Branches scratched at his face and arms as he pushed forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. Karen remained silent, sensing the immense effort it took for the human to keep going. Behind them, the patrol spread out, their voices echoing through the night. "Search the perimeter. They've got to be close." Michael gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move faster. His body screamed in protest, but he refused to give in. Karen watched him with a mix of awe and guilt. Among the Kurthans, strength was prized above all else. Yet this human, smaller and weaker by comparison, was demonstrating a willpower that surpassed anything Karen had seen. Finally, Michael stumbled into a small clearing, his legs buckling under the strain. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. We need to hide," he panted, glancing around for cover. Karen scanned the area with his compound eyes, his sharp vision catching movement in the distance. The patrol was closing in. "They are coming," he said urgently. "You must go. Save yourself." Michael shook his head, his breathing still labored. Not a chance. His eyes fell on a shallow depression in the ground, partially hidden by overgrown roots. "There," he said, pointing. "We can use that." Karen nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. "You risked too much." Michael ignored the comment, dragging the sled into the hollow and covering it with branches and leaves. He crouched beside Karen, his rifle at the ready. The faint sound of footsteps grew louder, the patrol sweeping through the forest with ruthless efficiency. Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Karen obeyed, his body tense, as the patrol moved closer. His acute hearing picked up snippets of conversation, frustrated commands, the crackle of radios. The humans were relentless, their search methodical. Karen felt a pang of respect for their determination, even as it put him in greater danger. One of the soldiers passed within meters of their hiding spot, his flashlight sweeping the area. Michael held his breath, his finger hovering over the trigger of his rifle. Karen watched him, marveling at the steadiness of his aim. Despite the chaos, Michael's focus remained unshaken. The soldier lingered for a moment, then moved on, his footsteps fading into the distance. Michael exhaled slowly, his body relaxing ever so slightly. "That was too close," he muttered. Karen clicked his mandibles softly. "Your people are formidable." Michael glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're not so bad yourself, for a giant alien." The humor was lost on Karen, but he appreciated the sentiment. "Your loyalty confounds me. Among my kind, such actions are rare." Michael shrugged, his gaze scanning the forest for any signs of movement. "Maybe that's why we're different. We don't leave our people behind. And right now, like it or not, you're one of my people." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Karen had never considered the possibility of being anything other than an outsider among humans. Yet Michael's actions suggested otherwise. It was a strange feeling, one that stirred something deep within him. As the night wore on, the sounds of the patrol gradually faded, replaced by the soft hum of nocturnal creatures. Michael slumped against a tree, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Karen watched him silently, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't fully articulate. For the first time, Karen saw humanity not as an enemy, but as something more, a force capable of defying its own limitations, of forging bonds in the most unlikely circumstances. It was a revelation that shook him to his core. Michael's voice broke the silence, soft but resolute. "We're not out of this yet, but we'll make it. Together." Karen nodded, his mandibles clicking softly. Together. Bonds forged in fire. The forest was quiet again, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of nocturnal creatures. Michael leaned heavily against a tree, his body aching from the relentless effort of dragging Karen to safety. His breathing was slow and shallow as exhaustion threatened to overtake him. Karen, still secured to the makeshift sled, watched Michael with a mixture of gratitude and unease. The human's loyalty was admirable, but Karen couldn't ignore the toll it was taking. He had underestimated the resilience of this species, and now, for the first time, he felt the stirrings of something alien to him: guilt. "You cannot keep this pace," Karen said softly, breaking the silence. "You will die before I do." Michael chuckled weakly, shaking his head. "That's the thing about humans. We're stubborn. We don't give up, even when we should." Karen tilted his head, his antennae twitching. "Your kind's stubbornness. It is both your strength and your weakness." Michael smirked, his eyes heavy-lidded from fatigue. "Yeah, well, it's what got us this far." Karen studied him for a moment, his compound eyes glinting in the dim moonlight. "You speak of survival as if it is a choice. For me, it has always been a necessity." Michael straightened, his expression serious. "For us, it's both. We fight because we have to, but we also fight because we believe there's something worth saving. Families, friends, a future." The words hit Karen like a bolt of electricity. A future. It was a concept he had never truly considered. For the Xerthans, life was an endless cycle of conquest and domination. The idea of fighting for something greater, something intangible, was foreign to him. Before Karen could respond, the faint sound of movement caught his attention. His antennae twitched as he strained to locate the source. Something approaches. Michael tensed, his hand immediately going to his rifle. He scanned the forest, his senses on high alert. The faint rustling grew louder, closer, until a shadowy figure emerged from the underbrush. Michael raised his weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. The figure stepped into the clearing. A woman clad in Earth military armor, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. She froze when she saw Michael, her eyes narrowing. "Lieutenant Reyes." Michael's shoulders relaxed slightly, though he kept his weapon raised. "Corporal Davis, what the hell are you doing out here?" The woman's gaze flicked to Karen, her expression hardening. "I could ask you the same thing, sir, and why you're dragging an alien with you." Michael stepped forward, blocking her line of sight to Karen. It's not what you think. He's not a threat. Davis scoffed, her hand resting on her sidearm. Not a threat. He's the enemy. We're at war, Lieutenant. Michael's jaw tightened, his voice firm. He's injured, abandoned by his own people. I couldn't just leave him to die. Davis shook her head, disbelief written all over her face. Do you hear yourself? You're risking your life, and ours, for one of them. What's Command going to say when they find out? Michael stepped closer, his tone softening but still resolute. Davis, listen to me. I don't expect you to understand, but this isn't about the war anymore. It's about doing what's right. Karen watched the exchange silently, his respect for Michael growing with every word. The human was willing to stand against his own kind for the sake of a creature he barely knew. It was a loyalty Karen had never encountered, and it left him both awed and unsettled. Davis hesitated, her gaze shifting between Michael and Karen. Finally, she lowered her hand, letting out a frustrated sigh. You're out of your mind, Reyes. But fine. If we're doing this, we need to move. Patrols are crawling all over this sector. Michael nodded, relief washing over him. Thank you. Davis muttered something under her breath and moved to help secure the sled. Karen watched her warily, his mandibles clicking softly. Your comrade. She does not trust me. Michael glanced at him, a faint smile on his lips. Give her time. Trust doesn't come easy, especially in a war. The trio moved cautiously through the forest, Davis leading the way while Michael pulled the sled. Karen remained silent, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't fully articulate. For the first time in his life, he felt the stirrings of something he had never known, belonging. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, they reached a hidden supply cache nestled in the woods. Davis crouched down, entering a code into the lock. The door slid open, revealing a small but well-stocked bunker. We'll rest here, Davis said, her tone curt. But we need to figure out what the hell we're doing next. Michael nodded, helping Karen into the bunker. The alien leaned against the wall, his body sagging with exhaustion. You have saved me twice now, he said, his voice soft. I will not forget this. Michael met his gaze, a tired but genuine smile on his face. We're not done yet, big guy. This is just the beginning. Redemption in the void. The bunker was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that hummed with unspoken tension. Michael sat on an overturned crate, his rifle resting across his knees, while Davis paced near the doorway. Karen remained propped against the wall, his breathing slow but steady as he recovered from the grueling escape. The faint light of dawn filtered through the narrow vents, casting long shadows across the room. We can't stay here long, Davis said, breaking the silence. Her voice was clipped, the weight of their situation evident in her tone. Patrols will find this place eventually. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. I know, but Karen needs time to recover, and we need a plan. We can't keep running forever. Davis shot him a sharp look. We wouldn't need a plan if we weren't dragging him along. Karen's compound eyes flicked toward her, his mandibles clicking softly. I am aware of the burden I pose. If it becomes necessary, leave me. I will not hinder your survival. Michael stood, his gaze firm as he addressed both of them. No one's getting left behind. Not him. Not you. Not me. We're in this together. The conviction in his voice left no room for argument. Davis crossed her arms, her lips pressing into a thin line, but she didn't push further. Karen regarded Michael with a mixture of admiration and confusion. The human's loyalty was unwavering, even in the face of danger. It was a trait Karen had never seen among his own kind, and it stirred something deep within him. The faint hum of an approaching vehicle shattered the fragile calm. Davis froze, her hand going to her sidearm. We've got company, she said, her voice low and tense. Michael moved to the vent, peering through the narrow slats. His stomach sank as he spotted a Xerthan transport hovering above the treetops. It was sleek and angular, its hull shimmering with the advanced technology of Karen's people. "They're scanning for survivors," Michael muttered. "Probably looking for you," he added, glancing at Karen. Karen's antennae twitched. "If they find us, they will not hesitate to kill you both." Davis snorted. "Great, just what we needed. More reasons to regret this." Michael ignored her, his mind racing. "We can't fight them head-on, but we might be able to outsmart them." He turned to Karen. "Do you know their protocols? How they'll approach this?" Karen hesitated, his gaze shifting to the floor. "They will prioritize efficiency. A scan of this area will confirm our location, and they will deploy ground troops to eliminate any resistance." Michael nodded, formulating a plan. "If we can make it look like we've already moved on, they might not waste time searching here." Davis raised an eyebrow. "And how do we pull that off?" Michael gestured toward the supply crates stacked against the far wall. "We rig a decoy, something to make it look like we set up a trap, and then abandon the site. If they think it's too risky or not worth their time, they'll move on." Karen inclined his head, a faint glimmer of respect in his eyes. "A bold strategy. It may work." The three of them sprang into action, working quickly to set the trap. Michael rigged a small explosive device from the bunker's supplies, positioning it near the entrance to create the illusion of a booby trap. Davis scattered false trails leading away from the bunker, her movements precise and efficient. Karen, though still weak, provided valuable insights into Xerthan behavior, ensuring their ruse was as convincing as possible. As the final preparations were completed, the hum of the transport grew louder. The tension in the bunker was palpable, each of them holding their breath as the Xerthan ship descended. Through the vents, they could see the ground troops deploying. Tall, armored figures moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The first soldier approached the bunker, scanning the area with a handheld device. When the scanner beeped, the soldier signaled to the others, their weapons trained on the entrance. One of them moved forward cautiously, triggering the decoy explosive. A flash of light and a loud bang filled the air, sending the soldiers into a defensive stance. "Good," Karen murmured. "They will assume resistance is nearby." The Xerthan squad leader barked an order, and the soldiers began sweeping the area. Michael's heart pounded as he watched them search the false trails Davis had created. Minutes felt like hours as the Xerthans moved farther from the bunker, their focus shifting to the decoy. Finally, the transport lifted off, the troops recalling to the ship. Karen exhaled a soft click of relief. It worked. Davis slumped against the wall, her tension finally easing. "I can't believe that actually worked." Michael leaned against the crates, his exhaustion catching up with him. "It's not over yet. We still need to get out of this sector." Karen met his gaze, his compound eyes gleaming with newfound resolve. "You have risked much for me, human. I will not forget this." Michael gave a tired smile. "We're not done yet, big guy. Let's focus on getting out alive." As they prepared to move, Karen found himself reflecting on the strange turn of events. The human's loyalty and ingenuity had not only saved his life, but also challenged everything he believed about strength and survival. For the first time, Karen felt the stirrings of something he had never known, a desire to repay kindness with loyalty of his own. Together, the trio disappeared into the shadows, their fragile alliance strengthened by fire and forged in trust. The war still raged on, but in that moment, they had found something greater than survival, a shared purpose, and the hope of a better future.